Hey, I'm Scott.
And I'm Chris.
And this is Doxalogic, where we help you think with your Bible.
What does the Bible have to say about IVF, use of frozen embryo to have a baby? Is it moral?
Loaded question. If you kind of come out of the gate with a strong, no, it's not moral, you have just immediately alienated just a lot of Christians that have chosen to go down the route of IVF and had children with IVF, obviously, right? And yet I am aware enough with just very much a novice or an amateur in this, right? But aware there's an IVF industry that has concerns in terms of ethics and how things are either stored and what's being done, and even the way they are encouraged to have the embryos, how many of them. And I know some believers I've even met and counseled with talking about we're only going to do as much as many embryos as we would be happy if 100% took and we got all those babies. So I'm not going to do 27 of them, but I'm going to do 3. And if God were to give 3 children to us, we would take every single. Right? Does that make sense? So there's just I want to say that there's a lot of wisdom needed, and I'm no pro in it. There are some ethical concerns out there with the industry of IVF, and yet I'm not going to just immediately say it is immoral top to bottom.
A good book on this, if they want to go into it in more detail, is Andreas Kostenberger's book, God, Marriage, and Family. And I think there's updated versions of it, but he has a pretty explicit section on IVF in particular, as well as other contraceptives and sort of lines of drawing kind of ethical distinctions between them, right? And that reminds me as well is there are other books like A Brave New World. I think it's by John Feinberg. It's a book on ethics. A lot of times books on Christian ethics will get at this in specificity. And I think of even Wayne Grudem's book. And so I pulled that one up because he's got a book on ethics as well. And he gets into some of this stuff too. And so let me give you his kind of basic framework because I just kind of pulled it up. So he speaks of it first as saying, okay, let's establish this point. Overcoming infertility is pleasing to God. God's a God of life. That's a good thing when that is able to happen. He then gives the next point. Modern medicine, generally speaking, is a divine blessing. That's morally good. And he kind of talks about, Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The third point he makes is we should treat an unborn child as a human person from the moment of conception.
Amen.
Not get that confused at all, right? The fourth point he makes is children should only be conceived by and born to a married man and woman.
And that's going to be an alienating phrase to a lot of people right there.
That's right.
But should not be to the believer, but that is in our world right now a big deal.
Right. And then he concludes by saying, therefore, IVF is a morally good action in some circumstances.
There you go. Yeah.
And so anyway, that's kind of the framework, and you're wrestling with that. What I remember about Kostenberger's book, because we read that for premarital, really good, rich. It's got a lot of footnotes, but it's a good book. Is that you're really wrestling through? There's Bible verses that you can wrestle with, but it's wisdom. It's knowing how to apply those Bible verses and where you would draw lines. Like once you mess with the taking of that, that, I guess, what would you call that? That taking of the egg and the sperm. You're going.
Yeah, okay.
And not messing with that, with the conception process from that point going forward. But that's different than something that would keep them from ever uniting in the first place, right? And so anyway, there's different lines by which you would establish places that you're comfortable with while being fully biblically informed of the greater overall picture of what the Bible has to say about these things, right? And that's not even to get into the dynamics of IVF, as he said, can be morally good, he would defend in some circumstances, but it also can swing into the side of I'm God, I'm playing creator, I'm doing that kind of thing. And it would be wrong to say that's the motive and intent behind everyone that's doing it, but it does explain some of the what did you call them? The IVF treatment centers and the way this is expanding into areas that Christians should probably have a check in their spirit about.
Yeah.
I think what counsel I've given a number of times is to say only the couple can answer this, but are you going through this process by faith or by fear? And so what's driving you to do this? Is it faith in God that you're submitted to his will? And if it doesn't happen through this, it may as well be done. Or is it I'm fearful I will never have children, so I'm going with IVF to control and basically play creator and almost like this will guarantee that I get kids, right?
Yeah.
And people won't say that explicitly, but in our heart of hearts, if that's what we're leaning on, that's a problem for ourselves. Before it's even a problem of the IVF industry and all this, it's why are you doing it? By faith in God and submitted to his will, or by fear? And that's really only a person or couple can process that together.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a stewardship to it as well, because it can be expensive and you have to think through that. And at what point maybe do you consider adoption or all that? Those are wisdom decisions.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to weigh into literally every person's life and say, unless it was just so clear that every form of IVF, no matter what, couldn't even be described in the category of possibly morally good, right?
Yeah.
You've been listening to Doxalogic, a podcast by Doxa Church in Rockland, California. To learn more, visit us online at doxa.church.